I'm Brendan Baylod, the administrator of the site, and this is my kitchen. I'm here locked down in sunny DeForest, Wisconsin. And we are privileged tonight to have one of the most prolific authors on the Great Lakes with us, Wes Oleszewski. I'm going to give it a minute or two to let people start to join the group and get on the broadcast. I'd like to ask our members, if you have, if you're on, drop a message in the chat so we can see that you're on and listening. And feel free to drop questions in as we do the interview. As you know, it's an hour-long interview show where I interview people on the Great Lakes who are doing interesting, groundbreaking, or particularly cool work with Great Lakes shipwrecks. And Wes is certainly that. I've been a big fan of Wes's work for a long time. Those of you who saw my post of all my pictures of his books and my hashtag Wes fanboy know that I've been reading Wes's books for a long time. I kind of got into him by way of reading Fred Stonehouse's books. So Wes has written 25 different books. That's just amazing. So Wes, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I'm really excited to have you on the show. And then next week, Fred Stonehouse is going to be on. I'm kind of robbing the Avery Color Studios stables here for guests. But boy, Wes and I
or Fred.
That's right. Wes and I, we have a lot in common. We were just chatting. We were both hockey players, and we were really enjoying comparing notes about that. But we share a lot in common in our research interests as well. And so I got Wes on the phone last night to get queued up, and my God, we were on for 2 hours, I think.
That's correct.
And I've known Wes. I think we had you at the Ghost Ships Festival in Milwaukee one year, and we got to know each other a little bit there. And I got all my books signed by Wes, my Wes books. Anyway, so Wes, thanks so much for agreeing to do this. It's really a privilege to have you on. Again, one of my favorite Great Lakes authors. And I should mention to everybody too, Wes has a YouTube channel he started, and he's putting up some really cool content on there. And if you look at the group, you're going to see that I shared some of his videos today. So Wes, I look forward to seeing more of your videos on the Great Lakes Shipwreck Research Group.
I look forward to making more of my videos. You said that we're both hockey players, and I can prove it. Those are not mine. Those are store-bought. Sorry, folks. I played juniors in the 70s, and that was a mark of honor. So anyway.
Cool. Well, Wes, a couple of housekeeping things I just want to get out of the way. My goodness, the Great Lakes Shipwreck Research Group, and I think I say this every show, we started this probably for me and 50 of the geekier shipwreck research buddies I had on the lakes, like people like Wes, where we really like to go and pick around in the news microfilms, And instead, we got thousands of members. We are getting about 100 new members a week. I think we're up to almost 1,800 members. Turns out there's a lot of people that are interested in shipwrecks and also in learning the stories of shipwrecks. I did a poll on the group last week where I asked, what people were most interested in seeing on the group. And they like stories of obscure shipwrecks and vessels that are still missing. And that is your forte.
Yes, it is.
Cool. Well, so the group is doing, particularly well. And I invite people to post Great Lakes Shipwreck research content on the group. If you're doing something interesting, if you found something cool, I really like the guys. Nick Smith is a good example. He's finding shipwrecks from Google Earth that nobody knew about. I think he's had 3 of them now, and he posts them on the group. And new sites that no one knew were there. Just great stuff. So shows that a community like this can really do quite a lot. So anyway, Wes, one of the things I always ask our guests, because we read the books, everybody sees you in writing, but people don't know a lot, I think, about you, and a lot of people want to get to know the people that are on here. So can you tell me a little bit about yourself, Wes? What's your background, and how the heck did you find this kind of interesting avocation?
Well, I started out as a child, and I'm the proverbial born on the wrong side of the Saginaw River kid, where all the industry is, and every time we would cross the bridge, I'd driving with my dad, I would always look out the window to see if there was a boat in. And he said, I'd go, "No boats, Daddy." So in later years, I heard that back many times from him. But anyway, so I had a passing interest. We used to run a cabin up at Whitestone Point and watch the boats go by on the horizon. I was more into aviation and space than anything else, and I ended up going to the Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Daytona Beach, Florida, and I got a bachelor's degree in aeronautical science and all of my commercial pilot certificates, and then proceeded to hack my way through the aviation business by working my way through college, which took, well, actually, I was only in college, only working my way through college for 3 terms. One for Carter and 2 for Reagan. So it took approximately 10 years to get my way through college. Once I got through, then I had to go out into the business and make it all the way up to airline captain. And then after I got out of the airlines, I escaped that nonsense and flew corporate for a while. And I got furloughed from that job after the dot-com crash. And so I just ended up writing for a living. So I got out of that business and took up this full time. But the whole time that I was flying, I was actually writing. So I published my first book shortly after I got out of college. And that was Stormy Seas was my first book. And I recall that I sent the first manuscript to the great John Greenwood, who promptly rejected it with some pretty rude stuff written in it and about what I needed to do to this to make it, quote, publishable. And I had a second copy of that I put on a shelf. And while I was working on my flight instructor's rating, just for the heck of it, I took it off the shelf and sent it off to Avery Color Studios. And they were looking for an author at the time, and they got me. Now, how I really actually just got onto the subject of Great Lakes maritime history was I started casually looking at shipwrecks. In summer of 1977, I bought Dwight Boyer's Ships and Men of the Great Lakes, and that was the first shipwreck book that I actually read. And that inspired me in later years to kind of look at this a little more. And one day while I was working as a hangar rat, that's the guy who mops the floors in the hangar and turns the airplanes around and, everything else you paint yellow. I was doing that one period while I was working my way back into college. And one of the corporate pilots there, his name was Gary Dice, was a corporate pilot for Dow Corning Corporation, was sitting in the lounge, and he was talking about how he hadn't flown in 2.5 weeks. And I said, "Well, what are you doing when you're not flying? Do they have you in the office or something?" He went, "No, heck no." He said, "I stay home and play with my trains." And he said, "You have a hobby?" And I said, "Well, I build model planes and I do model rockets." And he said, No, something away from flying. You got to get something away from flying because you are going to burn out if you don't. And so I took that to heart. And so now I doubled up on going into the microfilms and getting copies of old newspapers and studying the marine matters and that sort of stuff and finding out more about this subject. When I was in my senior year for school, I was out for the summer and I was working as a driver for Fox Photo Company. And my second job, I always had 2 jobs if I could manage it. My evening job was I worked in a Great Lakes nautical gift shop. And standing there all by myself one night, I noticed that they had all the books that I had in my own library. There was nothing new. Nobody was writing anything new. And so I decided, well, I'll write it if nobody else will. And nobody ever told me, "You can't write a book, you're too stupid." So I was stupid enough that I took a legal pad and a pencil and my microfilms. And the next day at my Fox Photo job, I sat at my lunch hour and I started penning out my first story. And the first story that I actually wrote was called All in a Day's Frustration. And it was about a boat that got ice locked in the Saginaw River because one of the bridges wouldn't open. And I happened to have all of that transcript on tape, so I could use that as part of it. And I started making stories like that. I wanted to make the stories of the stuff that people haven't written about before. Everybody's written about the storm of 1913 ad nauseum. Everybody's written about the Edmund Fitzgerald over and over again because it makes a lot of money. And, at the storm of 1905, the Armistice storm, this storm, Black Friday, they've all been written over and over again. And when I started looking at the old newspapers, I found out there were a lot of wrecks and adventures and things in between all of that nobody is looking at. So that's for me to do. And I had to fine tune the way that I researched and try to dig and dig and dig. These days, if I find a wreck that I don't think anybody knew about, I'll go in and I'll ask some of the divers. And I'll say, oh, what do you know about this wreck? For example, the Dolphin was a barge, a lumber barge. And I asked a couple of the folks up there on Lake Huron, what about the Dolphin? And they all said, I never heard of that thing. So I have here, this is my folder on the Dolphin. Okay.
Cool. Yep.
The wreck that nobody heard anything about. Okay. I went as far as to find one of the crew members that had been met in a bar, or they called it a saloon in those days, and convinced to come out on one last trip on this Dolphin. And he went home to his house that was right across the river, or right across the road from a big sawmill. I actually found his house. I found the foundation of his house. And I got right on the sidewalk and I walked his last steps that he had on solid ground up to where the lumber dock was, where he got on his last trip. And I can tell you right now, if you read my story about the Dolphin, you're going to find it's called If Found, Please Return. In there, you will find out what that individual has in the breast pocket of his shirt and what it says on the flyleaf.
Which book is that in, Wes?
Oh gosh, I think it's probably in the Best of Wes.
Ah, the Best of Wes.
Check into that, and if it's not, let me know. But anyway, that's just one example of the types of research that I do on these stories. Now, you can't put every doodad in there. Along that path, I found out that right above that saloon were apartments, and my grandmother and grandfather rented one of those apartments in the late 20s. So it's like, whoa, the stuff you stumble upon. Sure. But that's what I do with my books. That's what I decided to do with my books, to make them different. And that niche has worked for me.
It certainly has. And, there are a lot of fans to prove it that really enjoy your writing. So one of the things that I know you and I really enjoy is, collecting the books, by the old authors. And one of the things we both agree on, too, is that, there's a lot of hero worship that goes on, and people just think, well, Boyer said it, so it has to be true. And what we find is that now with the internet, and there's so much more information, that, boy, we're rewriting some of that history. Wes, can you tell me a little bit about some of that?
Well, I think some of that comes from the fact that, number one, they didn't have some of the assets that we have. But number two, there was sort of an attitude of, who's ever going to know? If I put a name in here, who's ever going to know? Nobody's going to go look that up. Well, unfortunately, yeah, we're going to go look that up. And my first hint was when I found out that I started looking for names of crew members. And I found out that very rarely do you get the first and last name complete, other than that of the master or that of the first engineer. Other than that, you normally don't get the full names. But if you look at my favorite author, Dwight Boyer of the day, he uses full names all the time for crew members. And you look at that and you say, okay, that's made up. So there are little hints like that. The great John Greenwood, as we've said on your site before, watch out for his photographs. A lot of the ones that he uses are not good. There's one, the William Rudolph, and he has this big bio about this William Rudolph and what he did and why this vessel was named after him. I have an article right over there from the Saginaw News. It was named after a company that was run by a guy whose last name was Rudolph and a guy whose last name was Williams. So it was William Rudolph. And so that's made up. So even things that we consider to be modern day things, people fudge on them. You and I can't do that, because now we're in a time where, we'll sit in front of the microfilm machine for hours on end, or as long as my vertebrae will allow, and we'll look up information and look it up and look it up and look it up and trace through it and go here and there and keep going. Where these guys didn't take the time, and they didn't think they had to take the time. And now we have to take the time, because if I put something in there that's complete BS, somebody's going to throw the big yellow BS flag down on the field, and it's going to land right in front of me. So I have to make sure that either I got it 100% or I have to tell you that this may not be correct, but the evidence points to here. And,
Wes, one of the things I noticed too that's changed is that those old authors were writing entertainment books mostly, whereas we are writing documentary history nowadays. And it's really changed. Nobody's really writing entertainment books, kind of like Walt Havighurst or Dana Thomas Bowen. We're expected to write documentary history.
Right. And, now I wrote one book that was essentially entertainment. It was the ghost stories book that Avery wanted me to write. Ghost stories are tough, man. You cannot prove that this is this or that this actually happened because it was in a flickering that something happened and people took that to heart. And I wasn't going to write it. And they said, we want you to write it. We'll say that right in the beginning. We want a book that people can sit around the campfire and read. Okay, so I gave it to them. They gave me a check. The book is still selling, so I'm still making money off of it. I like to say what I write are historical narratives. And I do on occasion, I'll say it right in the book, I synthesize some dialogue. A lot of times, if you look, you can find dialogue, but it's really hard. So sometimes if you have to make A go to B, you can synthesize a little dialogue. But if you tell people in the beginning, some dialogue is synthesized here, then you're valid. But as far as, if I don't have the guy's full name, you ain't getting the full name. And remember, in those days, in the pre-1920s, before you had to have a social security card and everything, it was habit for these guys to sign on to vessels under an assumed name. So you deal with a lot of that too.
So, one of the things that I know you and I talked about a little bit is this whole finding wrecks from the air business that's been going on a lot. And I've found several, you found several. It's really fascinating. But as an airline pilot, Wes, you were in a unique position to see things from the air. Did you ever look over out the window and see a wreck?
Many, many times. In 1988, my very first commercial pilot job was flying survey flights for the DNR, state of Michigan. And my route was, Michiganders, we do this. My route was from Saginaw over here, up around the thumb, and then across the bay to Tawas and back down. And I flew at 1,000 feet, and a guy sitting next to me from the DNR sat there with a clicker, counted fishermen down on the shore and in boats. And he kept a tally of that. Did that 3 times a week. Well, there's not a lot to do. When you've been trained as a multi-engine commercial pilot, instrument, all this, and now you're in a little Cessna 150 sitting on the floor, basically steering like this. Even sometimes the guy from the DNR liked to steer, and I'd let him do that. But you're sitting there at 1,000 feet over the lake. There's nothing to do but look down. And one day we were coming around Point Abac, and I looked down, and I spotted a wreck. It was clear as day, right straight down. And so I forgot about our job, and I had told him, I said, hang on. And I just put the airplane into a 60-degree bank. So we're coming around like this, banking, and I'm looking down and I'm telling him, look, you see it right there? You see it? Look, that is a wreck. That's a wooden shipwreck. And I wasn't hearing anything from him. And I looked over, he was white as a sheet. So I had forgotten that, yeah, he flew, but he always flew straight and level. And he wasn't used to any kind of maneuvers. And for a commercial pilot, a 60-degree bank is like, yeah, okay, that's fun. So he must have thought we were going to go right into the lake, So I had to straighten up and fly right after that. But for the other flights that I went on, I would mark the locations of assorted wrecks around the thumb. And I also, while flying out of Chicago one day, looked down. I was commuting, actually, so I had a window seat. And I looked down, and there was a wreck right down there. And I worked that one out and actually wrote a story about that particular wreck. And don't ask me what book it's in because I don't remember. But I have to explain that to your audience too. The way I write my stories is I'm ADHD, so I can focus like a laser beam. Okay, if it's something I'm interested in. If it's not, I'm like a goldfish. So I can really focus on something I'm interested in. And so I will focus on a story and I will really ream it out right down to the last scrap and then go a little farther. And then the story's done and I compile it and I write it and I finish it and I put it aside and I go, memory bank cleared. That's it. Next story. And that's the way I've written all of my books. So there's a lot of times when I can't tell you what story went into what book. As a matter of fact, I'm in a project right now where I'm going through all of my books and I'm categorizing what vessels were in what stories. So when people ask that question now, I really don't look like a doofus, because after 19 books, it's kind of hard to keep track of all that.
Oh yeah, I remember I used to go through every one of your books when I'd be researching a wreck. First thing I would always do is I'd have to go through Fred Stonehouse's books manually because they didn't have an index at the end, but yours always had an index. So I'd go through all your books. And it wasn't until Dave Swayze put up his database, and we, that referenced all of Fred's books, all your books, everything that was out there, that I finally was able to stop, beating the heck out of my West book collection to do research. And now, of course, that I do original research pretty much exclusively when I'm really interested in a wreck. But boy, your books have really been, proven extremely valuable to me. And I like the first one here that you signed for me back in 2002, the first edition.
As I recall that when we did that signing, you said one of the things you liked was that I had tracked the vessel passages up the Detroit and St. Clair River and told you in the story when each vessel passed at what time. And you really thought that was cool. So
yeah,
that was a total product of boredom. That was just before I got engaged to Teresa, before we had even gotten together. And I was, had a whole day of flying, and I had a weekend where I wasn't on the schedule. And I just locked myself in my room and I sat there and worked that out just to clear my brain. And it came out pretty good, I guess.
Oh yeah, and I followed your lead on that. I was researching the Bannockburn when I did my write-up, my Lost Ship of the Month. I thought, based on what you had found there, I thought I should go and see the vessel passages at the Sioux locks. And sure enough, the papers listed every one of them and what time it locked up and down. And I was able to tell a lot of new information there. And also with the Kitty Reeves loss in 1870, the copper wreck on Lake Huron, that never happened. There's no record of it coming through the locks. So no. Yeah, I picked up, just so people know, a lot of what I do, I learned from people like Wes and Fred and a lot of these more modern historians who kind of taught me how to think logically and think critically doing research.
That's a good point, because when I started, there's nobody who told you how to do this. I was flying on my own. Okay, even an airplane, there's procedures to tell you how to do things. There were no procedures for this. I had to kind of make it up as I went along and find out what worked and use what worked and not use what didn't work. And once I got my first book out, then Avery gave me a call. Anita McCullum gave me a call from Avery, and she said that Fred had read the book and he had some criticisms. And I was like, what? So, give me his number. So she gave me his number down in Fenton, and I gave him a call. And I was ready to really let him have it. But everything he said was constructive. Everything every in and out that he gave me made the next book way better. Sure. And after that, he counseled me on who to talk to, who not to talk to, who to tap for information, who to avoid, and who to go, what site to go to and what site not to go to as far as museums and so on. So that's why I say Fred was my mentor. He really he helped me along the way.
Yeah, very cool. I found my first Fred Stonehouse book was Keweenaw Shipwrecks, and I grew up in the Keweenaw, and I used to ride my bike when I was in high school up to Phoenix, which is a tiny little town up in the Keweenaw. And sitting on the shelf there was this book, Keweenaw Shipwrecks, and I bought it and stuffed it in my shirt and rode home with it and read it cover to cover, and that was that. I was hooked. My first ever book. So
my first one of his was Went Missing, and there's an important thing about Went Missing. When I got the idea to send that second manuscript off, I had pulled my copy of Went Missing off, and on the back was the address for Avery Color Studios. And so I called, in those days you called information on the phone. So I called information and they gave me the phone number for Avery. And I called up Avery and basically just asked, do you accept manuscripts from unpublished authors? And Anita McCullum had answered and said, yes, we do. And what I didn't know that Fred told me years later was Avery was just coming out of bankruptcy. Ron Avery had bankrupted the company, and Anita was bringing it out of bankruptcy, but she had no author because Fred had left. So she needed an author. And that's when my manuscript hit her desk. And so I waited a month, and I figured I'll get my rejection over the phone. So I called her up to get my rejection. She said, well, it's really amazing you should call me today. I have a contract in the typewriter for you right now. And I said, oh, wow. She says, how does $1,500 sound? And I said, yes. And then when I hung up the phone, I let out a wahoo like I just scored a hat trick and scared the daylights out of our cat. And she took off across the dining room table and actually left claw marks. So
that's a great story, Wes. So one of the things that I know you and I just love doing, and the people in the group have asked for, are these stories about shallow and obscure wrecks, because we all get tired of hearing about the Edmund Fitzgerald. And there's so many other amazing stories out there about these wrecks that no one's heard of, and the wrecks that aren't tourist wrecks, the dive tourist wrecks. There are some just amazing stories. And I'm working on a set of books about the Beaver Islands, the Fox Islands, and that north coast of Lake Michigan, which is really, really not only obscure but remote. And some of the stories are just astounding. And I know that's kind of, you have a penchant for that too. You were telling me a little bit of Burning of the Garden City. Can you tell me a little bit some of the cooler wrecks that have piqued your interest over the years?
Actually, I think you have a copy there. You might want to call it up, of John O'Shea's book. I don't know if you brought that photograph up or not, but that's about the Midnight in the Mears. And this was 2000, the summer of 2000. And I was up at Tawas and went into one of the bookshops, and he had made some postcards of the Table Rock wreck that is in Tawas Bay. And at that time, the water was low and you could actually go visit the Table Rock. So we talked about that a little bit and about wrecks around the area. And he said, Dr. O'Shea was in here the other day and he's got something in front of his cottage that he doesn't know what it is. And I said, well, can I get in touch with him? And he had his phone number. So I called Dr. O'Shea up and he said, sure. He said, gave me, come on out to my house. So my parents were up there with me, and so was my brother. So we all dragged out to Dr. O'Shea's house and went onto his beach, and there was this keel out there, half submerged. And so I knew what it was immediately. I knew it was either the Midnight or the Mears, because I had been deep into studying those wrecks at that point. I actually had the folder in my car. So we waited out and looked at it, and I told him what it was, and all of a sudden he was fascinated by it. And he's an anthropologist from the University of Michigan. So he and I examined it and took some pictures, and he got out some measuring equipment, and we did a good survey on it. In the meantime, I got on the phone. I called Eric Gila, who was working for TV5 then as a newscaster and sometimes the weatherman. And he's really into shipwrecks. So I knew Eric. And I called him up and I told him, guess what we've got here? And I told him about that. And he was on the phone with me. He said, do not move. I'm coming with a crew. And he got into the van and they come bolting from Saginaw all the way up to just south of Skoda, and showed up in about an hour and came out with a camera crew. And I'd love to tell this story. There was Eric in his reporter's suit. I'm talking business suit here. And he took off the jacket, handed it to the cameraman, and he waded in his suit pants out into the lake to see that wreck and get his hands on it. So we did a camera thing and talked about the wreck. In the meantime, one of the neighbors came down and like this and said, I don't know why your guys are so interested in that. It's nothing but an old dock. And I said, really? Who told you that? And she said, well, my father told me that. I said, well, let me show you a few things. So I started showing her the mast step and the sistered keelson, and I showed her how the bolts went through. And I said, you don't make a dock like that. And then I told her the whole story of the Midnight in Mears. And all of a sudden, she realized that this wasn't just a piece of garbage cluttering up the beach. This was a historic artifact. And so she went from scoffer to protector of that site. And that's just a good example of what I like about shallow water wrecks is you can go out and actually put your hands on them. And now sometimes you have to walk in the water along the beach so you don't violate somebody's private property. But when the private property person says, yeah, come on down to my beach, you do it.
Yep. Very, very cool story. I think, you know, especially where I am from up in the Copper Country, there's so many wrecks that are shallow in the Keweenaw waterway that no one knew were there. You know,
Yeah.
we used to take fishing lures off of them when we were kids, and I wondered what they were. And it turns out they have some really cool stories. And you know, it was a lot of fun researching them and learning about them. And I also scuba dived on them. You know, I'm kind of a shallow water diver. I don't go much over. Well, now I don't go deep at all, but I've never been much for water over 100 feet deep. And really cool to see some of those old ships. And once you see a couple of them, you start to know what looks like what a ship looks like underwater.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wes, I have Dr. O'Shea's book up here, but
he had started a survey, a scientific survey of the entire area from Tawas Point up to just north of Oswego Point. And I mean, they surveyed everything, every lump of coal, it's every piece of wood, you name it, they surveyed it. And and he actually discovered a wreck that I didn't know was there. So they found the May Queen. And it turned out that a couple of years before, I had actually gotten a piece of the May Queen. I'd gotten an entire footdock. And it's hanging up above my desk here. It was high and dry on a land spit, and the Coast Guard at those days said, if it's high and dry, you can take it. And so I took it. And it weighs 85 pounds dry. You can't imagine what it weighed water soaked. And I carried that sucker 3 miles to my car.
Very cool. I think I'm having a little trouble bringing stuff up to share, but on the screen. Let me try.
Well, we still plug Dr. O'Shea's book because it's a great book.
Yeah. Oh, it is. I love his book. Yeah, it's not showing up. Darn it. But yeah, for some reason the site's giving me trouble uploading images. I've got one of your images, but it's not letting me do others all of a sudden. I've had a little bit of bugginess with the software BeLive. It did last week too.
Yeah. Well, what I'll do for Dr. O'Shea is I'll make sure that I do a little video on my YouTube page about that little exploration with some good pictures of it, and I'll plug his book on that. So
cool. Yeah.
If you're listening, I'm going to plug you. Trust me.
I plugged his book in my famous wrecks that never happened too. It's a hard book to find. It really is. For some reason, it's maybe they didn't print a lot. It's called Ships and Shipwrecks of the Osable Shores region of Western Lake Huron, John M. O'Shea. And I bought it when it first came out, and I was really impressed. It's just a great piece of research. And I have my copy, but they're getting hard to find. And when you do see them, the prices they're asking are high. Anyway.
Yeah. I warn people, especially with my books, watch yourself on Amazon. If it's an out-of-print book that you can't find on authorwest.com, which is my personal website, if you can't find it there, if it's on Amazon and the price is more than $9, don't buy it. Used, don't buy it. I've seen them up there. People have on Amazon have offered my books in hardcover. Never have any of my books been done in hardcover. They've offered my books in hardcover for $49.95, and that's a scam. And you tell Amazon about that, and they don't care.
Oh yeah, my book, Fathoms Deep but Not Forgotten, is asking $90. I've seen it go asking $200-300. That's just silly.
Yeah.
Don't ever pay that for my books. Anyway,
and when they're third sellers like that, I don't make any more money off of it. When the thing came out of the warehouse, I got my 8%. So, if the book's out of print, I don't make any more money off of it. But the other thing is, to plug my own site, if you go to authorwest.com, right there, I have this desk over here is where I sign the books myself and send them straight to you. So you can get them customized. And right now I got a special going on. So the password to get free shipping is COVID-19 free, and you'll get free shipping. So
Wes, one of the things that I know we were chatting about that, particularly when you started writing these books, was really important, was to be able to get insider information from not only the old time wreck divers, but a lot of the old time collectors, the old photo collectors and stuff. A lot of those guys now have donated their collections, and so that's not so much of an issue. But boy, a lot of those guys, and I knew a lot of them were real characters and a little paranoid about who they talked to. Tell me a little bit about some of those old guys that you had to get an inside track with.
Well, I found out after a couple of books that you have to touch base a lot of times to get some information from two of the most lunatic groups on the planet, and that is collectors and wreck divers. Okay, they're crazy. So, and they're also the most paranoid people you've ever met in your life. And after a while, I was able to gain the trust of especially the divers, because if they found something new, I can't get it in print for at least 2 years and sometimes 4 years. So you tell me you just found something, I can't tell anybody else in print. I'm sorry, it won't happen. And I'm not going to put it out anywhere because then I scoop myself. So so guys like Dave Trotter and the great Bob McGreevy and those guys have come forward with information a lot of times. And especially from Trotter, he's told me stuff that I can't even pass on to you. So I've learned to deal with the divers. The collectors, that's different. They're highly paranoid and they're very reclusive. The one that has done me the most good was the late Ralph Roberts, and I met him at a show where we were signing books in Sanilac, and he just kind of shuffled up and thumbed through my stuff and kind of harumphed, and I knew who he was, and I asked could I contact you sometime, and he gave me his phone number. He said, but don't call often, and I actually denoted that, don't call often, under his phone number. And he said, so is this what you do for a living? I said, no, I'm a pilot. And he went, really? I said, yeah, that's like, I get a lot of my information from studying the annual reports of the Life Saving Service while I'm commuting. And he said, well, who do you fly for? And I told him Northwest Airlines. And he said, oh, really? And he says, you ever do anything out of Saginaw? And I said, yeah. I said, Russ Purchase gave me my private pilot certificate. And he went, really? And I said, yeah. And the lights kind of went on. And I said, Bill Crowler? I said, Bill Crowler taught me how to rivet. And he went, really? And then all of a sudden we had common ground because Ralph was also an A&P. So he was a mechanic on aircraft. And he was one of the best at making fabric covering on aircraft. So we had that common ground all of a sudden. And all the stuff about Great Lakes went away. And he sat there and talked for me for a long time about aviation stuff. So then he turned around before he left. And he said, by the way, you can call me as much as you want. So and then we went from there to I'm in town. And he says, why aren't you at my house? So
wow.
I really miss Ralph. He's a great guy. And I have told other researchers, if you want to go to a collector, one of the ways you get through to them is you got to take something in tribute. And it's got to be something they don't already have. And if it's your book and they don't have it yet, sign it in front of them. Don't sign it and then take it to them. So that's the way you get through to these people. But also, you got to keep your word. If you say, I'm not telling anybody about this, you don't tell anybody about it. And that's kind of the way it has to be. So by being honest like that, I found you get a long way than BSing people. Okay, if you're just honest about things, it's I'm from mid-Michigan. I got to be honest. Okay, we're from the Midwest, so stay honest and be honest about your work, and don't BS people, and be friendly. And one of the things I tell authors, budding authors, all the time is never stack your books at home the night before a signing and just plop them out in front of people. Never do that. They want to see you sign it. They want to know that you did it and it wasn't a stamp or something like that. That's part of the communication between you and your readers. And so, that's part of the job I really like. It's one of the better parts of the job. The best part is the detective work, but and finding new things. But meeting your readers, to me, that is a bonus. It really is. It's worth every minute that you spend doing it.
Definitely. I know Ralph was a famously reticent guy, and a lot of the old time collectors really were. They didn't want people. They didn't suffer fools gladly. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these guys, spent. Well, now you and I are in that boat, right? We spent 30 years of our lives now doing this, and we have big collections, and it's hard to remember sometimes when a younger guy comes up to you and says, "Oh, gee, can you tell me about this wreck?" Not to go, yeah, kid, you don't know anything. And we have a problem now with not enough young people getting into this. And so I really, really try to be encouraging, especially when a guy in his 20s or 30s comes up to me and says, what can you tell me about this wreck? And they always ask a dumb question, And instead of rolling my eyes, I say, it's a good question, and I try to be encouraging because.
Well, yeah, and I tell people that there's no such thing as a stupid question. There's just stupid people who ask the same damn question over and over and over again. So, and then they laugh, and they know that I don't mean them. But now another thing is when we come down to the, being up front and having some credibility part. I have myself been semi-hosed by divers. I was at a dive show there in Wisconsin maybe a decade ago, and a guy who was a part of a team that had discovered a wreck came up to me. They were going to talk all about this wreck at their presentation, and he said, "I just got to tell you, we used your book to help us find this wreck." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, we got there. It was pretty much where you said it would be." He said, "It was pointing in the direction you said it would be pointing in with the anchor paid out." And I said, "Really?" He says, "Yeah." He said, "We were really surprised at that." He said, "So your book helped us find this." I said, "Great." So I went and sat through an hour presentation, and guess what they never mentioned? My book. Yeah. It's like, thanks, guys. I'm glad I could help you. So, but it just goes with the territory. If you're gonna work hard and put out good information, you got to expect people to use it. And it's nice if they give you credit where credit is due. If they forget, well, then they forgot. It's the way it goes.
Yeah, a lot of people who are watching, of course, most of the people who watch the show are pretty hardcore. But for those of you who maybe are new or casually interested, the Great Lakes wreck hunting community is, and probably always will be kind of cloak and dagger. And a lot of us are friends and work together. Some of us better and more often than others, but generally speaking, we all know each other, and we're all pretty reasonably good friends. But there are groups, and there are people, and then there's information you just don't tell anybody. And we all have our research and our secret finds in the data. We all have our special wrecks where we kind of know more than the other guys about them, and guard it.
And there's times when that's detrimental to the divers. I had a group of divers. Once again, I stopped at a house to visit them. They were all together, and one of their team had just come back from the local library searching through microfilm, and they asked, "Did you find it?" And he said, No, couldn't find it." And I said, "What are you looking for?" And they said, "Oh, nothing important." I found out 6 months later that they had been looking for a safe that was allegedly in this wreck, and whether or not the safe was there. If they had asked me, I had that folder in my car. I could have walked out of the car, pulled the folder, opened it up, and said, "Here's the article that said the safe ain't there." And I could have saved them 6 months of fruitless work. But they had to be secret about it. And it's like, don't you trust me? Come on. What am I going to do with this? So, there you go. It goes all different ways. And I wish it wasn't like that. But I don't blame the divers that find something new and they want to protect the site from scavengers. That's really important these days. So I can understand that 110%. But guys like you and I, we're not the scavengers. We're the ones that are working the inside route of this, and that we can help you if you come to us. And then in turn, you can help us, because once you bring it out, then maybe I'll write about it and I'll mention your name and your dive team and everything else. But I don't think a lot of people have learned that yet. There are some who really have, and there are others who haven't. So there we go. But
yeah, I know I particularly liked you wrote up the L.R. Doty after there were a number of us involved in the research on that one. But I really enjoyed your write up on that.
Yeah, that was a fun one to sit down and work with. Being an airline guy and commercial pilot, I excelled in meteorology, and I've taken that study of meteorology back across the years. And so what I can do is I can take the conditions and I can siphon out which way the winds were blowing and when. And I can come up with a good location on these things because I can read the charts and I can read the old charts and I can look at the trends and I can predict where it would have been or where it should have been. And that helps with the drift or what direction the vessel had to be pointing in, and so on.
Yeah, it's a very nice write-up, and very insightful too. So, Wes, one of the other things that you mentioned a little bit is you've got a lot of irons in the fire with other books. A novel, another book this spring, your World War II book. Tell me a little bit about some of these really interesting projects you've got going on.
This is my novel, Invisible Evil. It ain't kiddies reading. It's a novel. It's for grown-ups, and it's an aviation spy thriller that will suck you in. My wife had been bugging me for years to write some fiction, so I did, and I got a publisher for this. Kind of self-published it, and you can find it once again on authorwest.com. So I've got a second novel written, and it's in proofreading right now. My editor, Chris Rotiers, who's also a big-time Great Lakes collector and expert in aviation and space and naval things, he's proofreading that for me. A good editor makes an author look good. So Chris makes me look good. And then I've got, this is the Great Lakes and World War II. And the follow-on to that, which is Great Lakes and World War II, the Region Answers, or something like that is what they call it. That'll be out in the end of April. I was supposed to be at Door County Museum on May 7th to release this book. But the way things are going, I don't know if we'll be able to get out of our houses on May 7th. So we'll see, let alone travel. So we'll see what comes along with that. So anyway, that's the next books. And then I've just started in my next book about Great Lakes shipwrecks. I told Avery that second World War II book was my last one about World War II. And I've wrung that subject out as far as I want to go. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a new shipwreck book. I have a concept for it. I bounced it off Avery. They did handstands over it. And so it's going to be another really good, fun shipwreck book. You're going to like it. It's going to be just as good as my others, maybe a little bit better.
Very neat, Wes. Very neat. I'll be sure to get one.
And, of course, I wrote about Spaceflight. So this is my Growing Up with Spaceflight 6-book series. I think you and I talked about this the other day, that I wrote 7 books in 2.5 years, and had all 7 of them published in a 2-year period. So I was a little busy there for a while.
A creative burst.
It's ADHD. What can I say?
Yeah, and this is a good time too. You and I have both been putting a lot of content out on YouTube. And I particularly liked your videos, and I shared them on the site. How to Spot a Wooden Shipwreck Part 1, and then How to Research a Forgotten Shipwreck. Really cool stuff, Wes.
Well, thanks. I wanted to take people on kind of the trip that we go on when we're out to find a wreck, or identify a wreck, or identify and uncover a story. And you don't always get all the answers straight up when you get to the end. Sometimes you're kind of left hanging, and you're either going to have to go stumble over something new, or you're going to have to wait until the answer comes to you. And sometimes that actually happens. So I really like doing that. I have to admit, I'm a pure amateur at this YouTube video stuff, so don't expect anything glitzy and don't expect anything fancy. When I told my daughters that we wanted to do a YouTube site, they thought that was a great idea, but I think they thought I was going to be the guy with the headphones on, and and the stocking cap and the sunglasses, who's talking about Minecraft while it's in the background. That's not the way it works.
Oh my God, Wes and I really enjoyed talking about that too. Because those of you who have watched my YouTube videos that I've been putting up, because people said, Brendan, we can't share the videos of Great Lake Shipwrecks live. Could you put them on YouTube? And I said, I could, I guess. I need to start a YouTube channel to do it. So I did that last month. I put up a YouTube channel for this group called the Great Lake Shipwreck Research Group, and I share these interviews on there. And I started to put in research videos up there, and I realized pretty quick that these guys who are making a living doing that are much better at videographers and producers than I am.
Yeah, so I have to work on my voice because I've got the booming voice of a kid who grew up with his father who's a railroad engineer. So at my house, if you didn't talk loud, you didn't get heard. And so I have to work on my voice. I have to work on my cadence. But I find that I'm trying to jam a lot of information into 6 to 9 minutes. And babe, it's hard for me to talk a little bit. I have to talk a lot. And so I'm still working at it, and I think things will improve as time goes on. I just have recently, as recently as last night, spoke to a friend of mine who was producing a documentary on the Great Storm of 1913 back in 2001. And our funding for that went down with the World Trade Center a month later. But anyway, we got on board the JV Ford, and I took a lot of photographs of what she looked like. And it was legal. The company that owns her said, yeah, go ahead. I contacted them. They let us get on board. We had an escort. And we went around and videoed the whole inside of the JV Ford. And he's pulling that video up now. It's in low res, and it's in a format that he doesn't have a box for right now. But he's going to buy a box, and he's going to try to bring that out. And when that does come out, you'll see it on my Facebook page. So that's going to be a lot of fun because it was really fun doing that video.
Yeah, I can imagine. A couple of questions are starting to come in from our viewers. We're getting towards the end of the hour, so I'll.
No math is involved.
What's that?
I said I hope no math is involved.
I hope not too. Somebody made a nice comment. Your research for Captain Warner's reputation and your wooden ships and deadly seas was very impressive.
Thank you. That was a story that one took me about 3 years to actually put all the pieces together in it. It was one of those that laid in a file, and I'd put a little bit in here and a little bit in there. And then I finally started putting the strings together, and I found a good way to go on that. And one of the keys was I got to visit some of the old locks from the old canal systems that fed into Cleveland. And it's like, oh, wait a minute. If he was going to go from here to there, he had to go through one of these canals. And so I put a little canal stuff in there too, and that was a fun diversion from just the outside lake stuff. Sure.
Another viewer asks, and this came up in our last talk about the Carruthers. That's been a hot topic lately. She's one of the last. I think now she's probably the biggest ship still missing on the Great Lakes.
Yeah.
Thoughts on the Carruthers?
I really have no thoughts on the Carruthers whatsoever. I mean, there's that new theory going around now that a lot of those large vessels actually grounded and broke off their shoe or disabled rudders and then got caught in the troughs of the seas. And that's a real interesting thing when it comes to the storm of 1913, because the lack of visibility and the lack of orientation, and why were this class of vessels damaged in that way or disappeared in that way when a lot of others made it through. The Hugh Kennedy went right through the same storm that sank the Carruthers. Why? They're the same size. They're the same class of vessel. How did that happen? That's a good connector that's being put out there now. And I said it's a good thing. I'm not sure if it's 100% that we can say that or if we ever will. But now the ghost story on the Carruthers, that was me that the guy came up to. I was out in the Thumb doing a book signing. I think it was at Harbor Beach. And I did a speech and then met a few people. And this guy came up and told me this story about this, him stranded on a boat in the fog and on a little rowboat. And this big ship came by and he was shouting for help. And nobody answered. Nobody was on deck and it just left. So he memorized the name. That was in 1948, I think he told me. He memorized that name. And so he said, he gave me the name and it was kind of chewed up. I said, would it be Carruthers instead of that? Yeah, that's it. I corrected him. And so I got a book and opened it up and covered the names of the vessels. And I said, see if you can pick it out. And he put his finger right on the Carruthers.
Wow.
So I gave him the word that that boat's been missing since 1913. And I think you saw yourself a ghost. And he was like, well, no wonder they didn't stop.
What a story. So, Wes, we have a user asking, anything new on the steamer Monteagle in Mud Lake?
No, actually, I got to go back and look at the Monteagle again. I think that was I did that one. Was called the Fang of Mud Lake, something like that. I have to go back and take a look at that again. I actually haven't gotten around to doing any work in that area. So if I get a chance, I'll absolutely go back and do that. And if I get something new on it, I'll make a YouTube video on it. What the heck?
Very good idea. Another user asks, Wes, of your many books, which is your personal favorite and why?
Ooh, which is my personal favorite and why? My personal favorite is Keepers of Valor. And Avery renamed that because bookstore owners were asking, what's this book Keepers of Valor about? Which simply demonstrates that there are some people out there that don't know the difference between bravery and fabric. So they changed the name. And it was one of the books that they took, and they had me take out all the references to Keeping the Valor and change that. And then they recovered it and put it out as a new book. And my readers hated that because they bought the same book twice. So I vowed never to let that happen again. But it's if you can find Keepers of Valor on Amazon, once again, if it's under $9, buy it. I think it's one of my best books. There's only one mistake in it, and it's a typo that calls the Daniel J. Morrell the Daniel J. Borrell. In the original manuscript, it was correct. It was one of those things that goes through so many computer programs to get into print that, you know, a 1 and a 0 gets misplaced and you get a B instead of an L.
Sure.
So, but that is my personal favorite. My second personal favorite is Ice Water Museum. And I've taken a lot of the stories out of Ice Water Museum and reprinted them in other books because I just want that material to get out there again. So, but like I said, if you get Keepers of Valor, that's my fave. That's my absolute favorite.
I have the original of that book too. I used to buy them all when they first came out, you know. But yeah, very good question. One of the users asks, frankly, the guy who found her, what happened to Chikora? So the Chikora was found, we're pretty sure, in the middle of Lake Michigan, way out there. Any thoughts about the Chikora, Wes?
Frankly, I have not taken a good look at the Chikora. That's not one of the ones that was on my list for Lake Michigan.
Yeah.
I'm happy that somebody finally found her. And that brings up another subject. The technology is growing so fast that I think within the next decade, we're going to know the location of every single wreck on the lakes.
Yeah.
And it's working that way. I've seen your Fox Island map, and you've got pinpoints all over the place in that Google Earth view. So we're pinpointing a lot of these, and each one of them we're going to research. We're going to find the names of it. I think within the next decade, we're going to document everything that's on there.
And also, you know, the magnetic anomaly data for the deep wrecks that are being found using the magnetic anomaly data, the high definition bottom mapping that's being done to the lakes. All the wrecks are going to be found. I mean, everyone. Yeah. And, you know, that's inevitable. And I think it's a kind of a golden age for telling their stories, you know, for guys like us who are doing this kind of research. So
now one thing is with the high water levels, what's happening is the shallow water wrecks that are near shore, the sand will migrate and cover them up. And then when the water's going to go down again, folks, sorry. And for all the media that are screaming about high water levels historically, the water levels, if you look at the Corps of Engineers information, were higher in 1986 than they are right now. So this is not a world record. It's not the end of the world. Okay, the water's going to go back down again. When it does, those wrecks will get uncovered again. But even the Table Rock, Rick Mixter and I tried to go out and find it snorkeling. I know exactly where that thing is. And I went right there, and it wasn't there. It's like, well, where did it go? Well, it's probably under 6 inches of sand. So that kind of happens. And but the deep wrecks are all going to be found.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. Well, Wes, we're running up towards the end of the hour. It's been a real pleasure to have you here, and a really fascinating conversation. Our users are giving a lot of great comments. They're really enjoying the show. Couple of housekeeping things I want to get out of the way. Next week, guys, Fred Stonehouse, you know, one of both Wes and my, you know, kind of mentors in Great Lakes maritime history. I'll never forget the first time I ever met Fred, you know, I had a stack of his books about this high. And he was at a conference and he saw me coming. I could tell he was trying to get away from me, you know. And I weaseled my way through. Mr. Stonehouse, Mr. Stonehouse, will you sign my book? He said, all of them? He says, you're not going to sell those for more money just because they're signed, are you?
Good question.
Yeah. Anyway, funny story. But so April 1st, Fred's going to be here with us, and we're going to have an excellent conversation. Not at all sure what Fred's going to want to talk about. I'm going to find out next week when I have the pre-show chat. But everybody, be sure to check out Wes's new YouTube page. Excellent stuff. Also, please feel free to buy Wes's books. They've gotten better with each book, and especially the new stuff that's coming out, Wes. And again, I really appreciate having you on the show. Any parting thoughts before we close her down?
Yes, go to authorwest.com, okay, and buy a book. That's all I can say, okay. I actually set that website up myself, and it comes from me. I sign the books for you, and I personalize them, and they come from me by priority mail to you. So go to authorwest.com and buy something, okay? We need to get my cat out of the vet. So, you know, get a spring.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us on the show tonight, and stay well. You know, if you're in an area that's locked down, you know, stay in and make the best of it. Wes and I are making the best of it by learning how to make videos on YouTube.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Wes, for joining me, and thank you everybody who tuned in tonight. Good night, everybody.